Wait, I am talking to F-18.
The cockpit went silent. No pilot, no voice, no answer, just static and 71 people who didn't know they were falling. Then a farmhouse radio crackled to life, and a stranger's calm voice took command. What she said next brought a dying flight home. Stay till the end, you won't believe who was listening. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Grace Hollis was sitting on her porch in Barlow County, Kentucky, shelling peas into a metal bowl, when the scanner in her kitchen window clicked over from static to voice traffic. She almost didn't notice it. The scanner had been running for 6 years, ever since her son installed it for her, so you don't feel so cut off out here, Mom. Mostly it picked up the county sheriff's department, sometimes the volunteer fire company, once in a while a trucker on the interstate 3 miles east. Grace kept it on out of habit more than need. She liked the sound of other people's voices doing their jobs. It reminded her of a version of herself that most of Barlow County had never met. What came through the scanner that Thursday afternoon in October was not the sheriff's department. Regional approach, this is Skyline 447, we have a problem in the cockpit, repeat, we have a problem in the cockpit. The voice was a flight attendant's, young, trying hard to sound steady and failing. Then nothing. Just open mic static, the sound of moving air, and somewhere underneath it, a woman crying. Grace set the bowl of peas down on the porch rail so gently it didn't even rock. She had not touched an aviation radio in 11 years. She had not spoken air traffic language out loud in 11 years. But some things do not leave a person just because that person has decided to leave them. Grace Hollis had spent 22 years as a United States Air Force air traffic controller and radar approach specialist, the last 9 of those years running final approach control for C-17 heavy transports coming into forward operating bases in weather that would have grounded most civilian airports twice over. She had talked pilots down through sandstorms with zero visibility. She had walked a Marine Corps helicopter crew through an engine fire at 200 feet with nothing but her voice and a stopwatch. She had retired a Command Chief Master Sergeant, the highest enlisted rank in the entire United States Air Force, and then she had come home to Barlow County to take care of her mother, and when her mother passed, she had simply never left. Nobody in town asked what she used to do. Grace never offered it. To the diner on Route 9, she was just the woman who grew tomatoes and kept bees and waved from her porch. Her old life felt like a coat she had folded up and put away in a drawer she didn't open anymore. She was opening it now. Grace went inside, past the scanner, to the hall closet where an old olive drab bag sat behind the winter coats. Inside it was a handheld aviation transceiver, military surplus, the same model she had trained on decades earlier and the same one she bought for herself the week she retired, just in case, she'd told her son, and he had laughed and said, "In case of what, Mom? A plane crashes in the backyard." She hadn't laughed back. She had just packed it. She switched it on. The battery held. Of course it held. She had checked it every single month for 11 years without ever quite admitting to herself why. She dialed to the emergency frequency, 121.5, the guard channel every aircraft in distress is required to monitor, and she keyed the mic. Any aircraft, this is Grace Hollis, Barlow County, Kentucky, monitoring emergency frequency. I am a retired United States Air Force air traffic controller. I am hearing distress traffic. Does anyone require assistance? Over. For 3 long seconds, nothing. Then a man's voice, breathless, trying to sound calmer than he was. Station calling on guard, this is Skyline Airlines Flight 447, we have an emergency. Our captain is unresponsive. Our first officer is unresponsive. I'm a flight attendant. I don't know how to fly this airplane. Grace's hand did not shake. It never had, not once in 22 years, and it did not now. Skyline 447, Grace Hollis. I hear you. Tell me your name. Danny. Danny Reyes. Danny, I need you to breathe once, slowly, and then talk to me. Where are you sitting right now? I'm in the captain's seat. I moved him. I didn't know what else to do. He grabbed his chest and then he went down and the first officer, she tried to help him and then her head went back. I don't know what happened to her, I think it was something in the air, there was this smell. Grace's stomach went cold, but her voice did not change at all. Danny, listen to me carefully. I need you to reach up above your head, there should be a yellow mask hanging from a small door in the ceiling panel above and slightly behind your seat. Do you see it? A pause, rustling. Yes. Yes, I see it. Pull it down and put it over your nose and mouth right now, before you do one more thing. If there is a smell in that cockpit, I don't want you breathing it while we talk. Do it now. More rustling. A muffled voice. Okay. It's on. Good. That was the most important thing you've done since this started, and you did it right. My name is Grace. I worked, Air Force Air Traffic Control for 22 years. I have talked pilots through things far worse than what you're facing today, and I promise you, we are going to get this airplane on the ground with everyone on it alive. Do you believe me? There was a long pause. Then, very quietly, I have to. That's good enough for now, Grace said. That's all I need. Behind Grace, on the highway a half-mile from her farmhouse, a Kentucky State Police cruiser had pulled over for an unrelated traffic stop and happened to have its own radio scanning the aviation guard frequency, a leftover habit from a trooper who used to fly medevac. He heard Grace's voice and immediately called it in. Within 4 minutes, the call had been patched through official channels to Nashville Center, the air traffic control facility responsible for that stretch of sky, and a controller named Walt Simmons found himself staring at a radar target, Skyline 447, a Bombardier CRJ-700 regional jet, 71 souls on board, currently in a shallow uncommanded descent at 18,000 feet, 60 miles from the nearest airport with a runway long enough to take it, while a woman he had never heard of was already talking the panicked flight attendant through basic cockpit orientation on an unofficial guard frequency that somehow, against every rule in the book, was working. Walt did something that would later be studied in an FAA training bulletin. He did not interrupt. Instead, he opened a line to Grace directly. Ma'am, this is Nashville Center, Walt Simmons. I've got Skyline 447 on my scope. I don't know who you are, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it, and patch me in so I can support you. What do you need from me? I need the aircraft's fuel state, current altitude, air speed, and the nearest runway of at least 6,000 feet with a straight-in approach and no terrain to worry about, Grace said. And I need you to stay off this frequency unless I ask you a direct question, because that young man in the cockpit does not need 2 voices telling him different things at once. He needs one voice and he needs to trust it. Walt Simmons, 26 years in the business, sat back in his chair for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "Copy that. You've got the frequency. I'll feed you numbers on request only," and he meant it, and for the next 11 minutes, one of the busiest air traffic control centers in the southeastern United States went almost completely silent so that a beekeeper in Barlow County could do her job. Back in the cockpit of Skyline 447, Danny Reyes was 26 years old and had been a flight attendant for 4 years. He had never wanted to fly the airplane. He had wanted, if he was honest, mostly free hotel points and a schedule that let him see his sister's kids on weekends. He had a high school diploma and a community college certificate in hospitality management and absolutely no business sitting in the left seat of a regional jet at 18,000 feet with 2 unconscious pilots on the floor behind him and a control yoke shaking gently under his hands from turbulence he did not know how to correct for. "Danny," Grace said, "I want you to look at the instrument panel directly in front of you, the one right in the center that has a small airplane symbol on a black background with a line across it. That's your artificial horizon. It tells you if your wings are level. Tell me what it looks like right now." "The little airplane, it's tilted. The left side is down." "Good, you're reading it correctly. That means your left wing is lower than your right wing. I want you to turn the wheel in front of you, gently, just slightly, to the right, until that little airplane symbol lines back up flat and level. Small movement. Like turning a steering wheel to change lanes, not to make a sharp turn. Danny turned it. The tilted symbol slowly straightened. It's level. It's level now. Perfect. That's called wings level, and it is the single most important thing you can do right now, more important than anything else, because a level airplane does not want to fall out of the sky. It wants to keep flying straight. You just did the hardest part of the next 10 minutes without even knowing it. In the back of the aircraft, the senior flight attendant, a woman named Priyanka Bhatt with 14 years of experience, was moving down the aisle with a calm she did not feel, checking seatbelts, quietly telling anyone who asked that the crew was handling a technical issue, that everyone should remain seated with belts fastened. She had heard, through the intercom that Danny had left open, every word Grace Hollis said. She had also heard the captain's collapse and the first officer's unresponsiveness, and she understood with total clarity that a 26-year-old colleague she had trained personally 18 months earlier was now the only person flying an airplane full of human beings, guided by a stranger's voice on a radio. Priyanka picked up the interphone and called the cockpit directly. Danny, it's Pri. I've got the cabin. Passengers are calm. You focus on that voice and nothing else. We trust you. Danny, for the first time since the captain went down, felt something other than pure terror settle into his chest. It felt almost like room to breathe. Grace, he said into the radio, what do I do next? Next we're going to check your fuel and your altitude, because I need those numbers before I decide where we're taking you. Look at the panel to your right, there should be a digital readout with the word fuel above it. Danny found it. It says 4,200 pounds, I think. Grace did a silent calculation, decades of instinct compressing into 2 seconds. Enough fuel. Not unlimited, but enough. Good. Now your altitude, the number on the left side of your panel that's changing slowly. 17,900. You're descending slowly, which is expected and fine. We're going to control that descent on purpose in a few minutes, but for right now I don't want you touching the throttles, the two black levers between the seats. Leave them exactly where they are. Just keep those wings level and breathe. Danny, I need to ask you something important. Is there smoke in the cockpit right now, or any smell? A pause. It's better since I put the mask on. I don't smell it as strong. Good. That tells me something happened, some kind of fume event, probably from an equipment fault, and it likely affected the captain and first officer directly at their stations before it reached you at the door. I want you to reach behind you, carefully, without letting go of the wheel with your other hand, and see if you can pull the first officer's mask down over her face too, in case she's still breathing that air. Danny managed it, one-handed, his voice cracking. Done. Grace, is she going to be okay? I don't know yet, Danny, and I'm not going to lie to you and pretend I do. But I can tell you the fastest way to help her is to get this airplane on the ground where paramedics can reach her, and that means you and I need to stay focused on flying for the next 10 minutes. Can you do that with me? Yes, Danny said, and for the first time, he believed it a little. Walt Simmons came back on the line at Grace's request with a short list of airports. Ma'am, closest suitable field is Barkley Regional, runway 7,000 feet, straight in from your current heading with a 30-mile turn, no significant terrain. Emergency crews are already rolling based on the distress call, ambulance and fire both. Copy, Barkley Regional, Grace said, and then, back to Danny, we have a runway for you, about 30 miles away, plenty long, no mountains, nothing complicated. In a few minutes I'm going to walk you through turning toward it and starting a controlled descent. First I want you to get comfortable with something simpler. I want you to very gently pull back on the wheel, just a small amount, and tell me what the altitude number does. Danny pulled back slightly. It's going up slower. It slowed down. That's called pitch, and you just controlled your descent rate with it. Now push forward, small amount, same as before. It's going down faster now. Exactly right. You now understand more about flying this airplane than most people ever will in their entire lives, and you learned it in under 2 minutes. That's not luck, Danny. That's you paying attention under enormous pressure, which is a very rare skill. I want you to remember that, whatever happens today. In first class, a retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Ames sat with her hands folded in her lap, listening to the muffled cockpit intercom Priyanka had quietly left cracked so the nearest rows could hear enough to understand there was, in fact, a plan. Dorothy had taught elementary school for 31 years. She recognized, in the calm cadence of the woman's voice on the radio, the exact tone she herself had used 1,000 times to talk a frightened child through a math problem they were convinced they couldn't solve. It is possible, Dorothy thought, that is exactly what is happening here, and something in that thought made her unclench her hands for the first time in 10 minutes. 2 rows back, a young father named Marcus Webb held his 4-year-old daughter Ivy in his lap, her small hand wrapped around his finger. Ivy did not understand what was happening. She only understood that her father's heart was beating very fast beneath her ear, and that he kept whispering that everything was fine, that they were going to see Grandma soon, and each time he said it, his voice sounded a little more like he believed it. He did not know that the woman guiding the plane down was also, at that exact moment, thinking of a granddaughter of her own, a little girl in Ohio Grace had not seen in 4 months, and that some part of Grace's steadiness in that farmhouse kitchen came from imagining that granddaughter, imagining every child on that airplane as someone's Ivy. Danny, Grace said, we're going to start your turn now. I want you to turn the wheel gently to the right, and at the same time press very lightly on the right pedal at your feet. Small pressure. You're not stomping a brake, you're just nudging the nose. Danny did as told. The airplane began a slow, shallow bank. The little airplane symbol is tilting again, he said, alarm creeping back in. That's supposed to happen when you turn, Danny, that's normal, that's not a problem, that's the airplane doing exactly what you're telling it to do. I want you to hold that gentle bank until your heading number, up at the top of your panel, reads 210. Tell me what it says now. 245. Good, keep the turn going, nice and easy, watch that number come down. Over the next 4 minutes, with Walt Simmons feeding altitude and traffic clearances in short, clipped sentences only when Grace asked for them, Danny Reyes brought Skyline 447 around onto a heading of 210 degrees, descending in careful, deliberate steps that Grace called out one at a time, down 500 feet, level off, check your speed, down another 500, level off. Never more than the frightened young man in the captain's seat could absorb in a single instruction. It was, Grace would say later, exactly like talking a brand new controller through their very first live traffic sequence. You did not give them the whole picture at once. You gave them the next right thing, and then the thing after that, and you trusted that if you did that enough times in a row, the whole picture took care of itself. Barkley Regional Traffic in sight, Walt reported. Runway 7, wind 220 at 8 knots, light and manageable. Fire and rescue in position along the runway. Grace relayed it simply. Danny, in about 6 minutes you're going to see a runway out your left window, long and gray, with some flashing lights near it. That's your airport. That's where we're going. When you see it, tell me. The minutes that followed were, according to everyone who later reviewed the cockpit voice recorder, some of the strangest and most remarkable radio traffic ever preserved by the National Transportation Safety Board. A woman with no official authority whatsoever, speaking from a kitchen radio in rural Kentucky, walked an untrained flight attendant through configuring a regional jet for landing, extending flaps in small increments, lowering the landing gear, managing airspeed down to a target of 140 knots, using language stripped of every technical term that wasn't absolutely necessary and replaced with plain, human instructions. The lever with the little will picture, pull it down until you hear the rumble and see 3 green lights. The lever to your left with notches, move it back 1 notch at a time, I'll tell you when to stop. Danny followed every instruction with hands that had started, finally, to steady, because somewhere in the last 15 minutes he had stopped being a flight attendant pretending to be a pilot and started being, in every way that mattered in that cockpit, exactly what the situation required him to be. "Runway in sight," Danny said, his voice cracking with something that was almost relief. "I see it. I see the lights." "Good. That's Barkley Regional, and that runway is going to be there in about 90 seconds. I want you to keep your wings level, keep your speed right where it is, and remember what I told you about the flare. When I say now, you're going to pull back gently on the wheel, not hard, just enough to lift the nose slightly, like you're trying not to spill a cup of coffee sitting on the dashboard." "Okay. Okay, I remember." "You're doing exactly right, Danny. 50 feet. I see it, I see the ground, it's coming fast." "That's normal, that's exactly what it's supposed to look like, hold what you're doing." 30 feet. "Grace. I'm right here." 10 feet. "Now. Ease back. Gently." Danny eased back on the wheel. The main landing gear of Skyline 447 touched the runway at Barkley Regional Airport with a firm, solid thump, tires screaming briefly against pavement, the nose gear settling a half-second later. The airplane rolled straight down the centerline, slowing under gentle braking exactly as Grace had described it, past 3 fire trucks and 2 ambulances already moving to intercept, and came to a full stop with more than 1,000 feet of runway still ahead of it. For 3 full seconds, nobody on the radio said anything at all. Then Danny Reyes, 26 years old, 4 years into a job he had taken mostly for the hotel points, put his forehead down against the control yoke of an airplane he had just landed with his own 2 hands, and wept. "You did it," Grace said quietly. "You did it, Danny. Every single person on that airplane is alive because you did not panic and you trusted the instructions and you did the work. That was you. I just talked. I couldn't have. You could, and you did, and don't you dare spend one more second doubting that. Now go check on your first officer. Paramedics are almost to your door." Emergency crews reached the aircraft within 90 seconds of it stopping. The captain, a 22-year veteran named Robert Kalani, and the first officer, Amar Osei, were both found to be suffering from acute exposure to fumes from a failed air cycle machine, a mechanical fault later confirmed by the NTSB as the root cause of the entire emergency. Both were unconscious but breathing, and both, remarkably, would make full recoveries within days, with Captain Kalani later telling investigators that the last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was reaching for his oxygen mask and simply running out of time. All 71 passengers and crew of Skyline 447 walked, or were carried, off that airplane alive. News of what had happened moved through the aviation world before the passengers had even finished being checked by paramedics on the tarmac. A trooper's scanner, a controller who broke protocol in exactly the right way, a flight attendant who flew an airplane he had never been trained to fly, and a retired command chief master sergeant who had spent 11 years telling herself her old life was folded up and put away. By that evening, news vans were parked on the gravel shoulder outside Grace Hollis's farmhouse, and Grace, who had never once in 11 years told her neighbors what she used to do, found herself trying to explain to a reporter from Louisville why she still owned a military-grade transceiver and why it had, thank God, still been charged. "I didn't do anything the Air Force didn't already teach me," Grace told the reporter, sitting on the same porch step where she'd been shelling peas that afternoon. "I just happened to still have the radio on." 3 days later, Danny Reyes came to Barlow County. He did not call ahead. He simply showed up at Grace's front gate, still visibly exhausted, and when Grace opened the door he didn't say anything at first. He just hugged her, the way you hug someone who is the only other person alive who knows exactly what those 18 minutes felt like from the inside. "I keep hearing your voice," he told her later, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. "Even now. I close my eyes and I hear you telling me to breathe." "That's the job," Grace said. "You give someone your voice so they can borrow your calm until they grow their own. You had it in you the whole time, Danny. I just handed you the flashlight. I want to learn to actually fly, Danny said. For real. Get my license. I don't know why. I don't want the only time I ever touch a control yoke again to be the worst day of my life. I want a good memory to go with it too. Grace looked at him for a long moment, and something in her chest, folded away for 11 quiet years, unfolded just slightly. Then I know a flight school 40 minutes from here, she said, and I know a very rusty old controller who wouldn't mind riding along. The National Transportation Safety Board's final report on the Skyline 447 incident ran to over 200 pages and led directly to an emergency airworthiness directive requiring inspection of the air cycle machine component that had failed, a fix that was implemented across the entire fleet within 6 weeks, likely preventing the same failure from ever endangering another aircraft. But the report included something else, too, something unusual for a document normally confined to hydraulics and airflow diagrams. A full transcript of the guard frequency communication between Grace Hollis and Danny Reyes, entered into the official record with a note from the lead investigator stating that the coordination demonstrated during the emergency represented, in her professional opinion, an extraordinary and possibly unrepeatable example of expert crisis communication under time pressure, and should be studied by controller training programs going forward. 6 months later, Grace stood at a podium in front of 300 air traffic controllers and controller trainees at a regional FAA training symposium in Atlanta, invited as a guest speaker for the first time in her life. She had resisted the invitation for weeks. Public speaking had never been her strength. Giving instructions to one frightened person over a crackling radio was a different kind of talking than standing in front of 300 professionals with notepads. I spent 22 years in the Air Force believing that the job was about the numbers, she told the room. Altitude, airspeed, heading, fuel. And it is about the numbers. But what I learned sitting in my kitchen 11 years after I thought I was done with all of it is that the job is really about trust. A scared 26-year-old who had never touched a flight control in his life did something that day that most trained pilots would tell you should have been impossible. He didn't do it because I gave him better instructions than anyone else could have given him. He did it because somewhere in those first 30 seconds, he decided to trust the voice on the other end of that radio completely, without reservation, and once he made that decision, everything else became simple. One instruction. Then the next one. Then the one after that. She looked out at the room. You will all, someday, sooner or later, be the calm voice someone needs. Most of you will never get a phone call like the one I got. But some of you will. And when it comes, I want you to remember that the person on the other end of that radio doesn't need you to be a hero. They need you to be steady. Those are two very different things, and only one of them actually saves lives. The applause lasted longer than Grace was comfortable with, and when it finally settled, a young controller in the third row raised her hand and asked the question Grace had been asked more times than she could count in the 6 months since the landing. Were you scared? Grace thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. The whole time, she said. Being scared was never the problem. Letting it drive was. Back in Barlow County, the old olive drab transceiver still sits on the kitchen windowsill, next to the scanner her son installed 6 years before an emergency neither of them ever imagined. Grace checks the battery every month, same as she always did, though now she doesn't pretend to herself it's just in case anymore. Danny Reyes flies out to visit twice a year, working now toward his private pilot's license at the small grass strip 40 minutes from Grace's farmhouse, and every visit ends the same way, the two of them sitting in an old 2-seat trainer as the sun goes down over the Kentucky hills, Grace in the right seat, quiet, watching a young man who once landed a regional jet with a stranger's voice in his ear slowly, carefully, joyfully learning to fly for reasons that finally have nothing to do with fear at all. Ivy Webb, the 4-year-old girl who sat in her father's lap that day with her small hand wrapped around his finger, is 7 now. She keeps a photograph on her bedroom wall that her father printed from a newspaper article, a picture of an older woman on a porch holding an old radio, and when people ask her who it is, she tells them, very seriously, the way only a 7-year-old can, that's the lady who talked our plane down out of the sky. She does not remember much else about that day. She does not need to. Somewhere in her, the way stories settle into children long before they understand them fully, she has already decided that when the world gets frightening, there is always, somewhere, a calm voice worth listening for. And on quiet evenings in Barlow County, when the bees have gone still in their hives and the last light is fading gold over the tomato rows, Grace Hollis sits on her porch, radio close at hand, and listens to the soft hiss of static on the guard frequency. Still on. She leaves it on. She always will. In memory of every controller, every crew member, and every stranger on a radio who has ever given someone else the calm they couldn't yet find in themselves, and to anyone who has ever answered a call for help simply because they still could.